On a cold winter night, a U.S. Marine walked past a homeless girl without stopping. He had learned to keep moving, to survive by not looking back. But his canines suddenly froze, refusing to take another step. What the Marine didn't know was that God was about to answer a prayer spoken 12 years ago. A prayer whispered in fear, a prayer believed to be lost. This is not a story about coincidence. This is about faith, patience, and how God reunites what the world says is gone forever. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from. And if this story moves you, subscribe for more stories of courage, faith, and unbreakable bonds. Your support truly means everything. Snow drifted through the empty streets of Helena, Montana, thin and dry, carried sideways by a wind that smelled of iron and wintered asphalt, the kind of cold that pressed into bones and refused to leave. Jacob Hale walked with the steady, economical stride of a man who had learned long ago how to move without wasting energy. At 42, his body still carried the shape of the United States Marine Corps. Broad shoulders, compact strength, muscle built not for appearance but for endurance. His face was sharply angled, with a weathered jawline, a narrow scar cutting faintly through the right eyebrow, and short-cropped dark hair already threaded with gray. A trimmed beard shadowed his cheeks, kept not for style but because shaving every morning had stopped feeling necessary years ago. His eyes were steel gray, watchful, rarely still, the eyes of someone who had learned that attention kept you alive. He wore a plain dark winter jacket, unmarked, heavy boots scuffed at the toes, gloves thick enough to block the cold but thin enough to feel the leash in his hand. Jacob didn't dress like a Marine anymore, but he carried himself like one in every other way, controlled, distant, deliberate. People often described him as calm. Those who knew him better understood it was not calmness, but containment. At his left side moved Ranger. Ranger was a 5-year-old male German shepherd, lean and powerful, his amber-toned coat darkened along the spine, ears erect and alert even in stillness. His gait was smooth, purposeful, every movement economical. His eyes, deep brown, intelligent, tracked the street with quiet discipline. He did not pull. He did not lag. Ranger had been trained well, but more than that, he had been chosen well. He was not impulsive, not nervous. He was thoughtful in the way only certain working dogs were, as if he processed the world before reacting to it. Jacob trusted Ranger more than he trusted most people. They had just finished assisting local police with a late-night welfare check on the edge of town. Nothing dramatic, no rescue, no headlines, just another quiet confirmation that the world continued to hold more loneliness than solutions. Jacob liked those kinds of nights. Predictable, contained. Nights that did not ask him to feel anything beyond what was necessary. They turned onto a side street that ran parallel to the old rail line, where the streetlights were spaced too far apart and half of them flickered. Storefronts sat dark and shuttered, windows coated with salt residue from passing trucks. The city felt hollow here, like a place people moved through but didn't stay. That was when Ranger stopped, not abruptly, not aggressively. He simply halted, his body stiffening, head lifting slightly as his nose drew in a long, careful breath. His ears angled forward, not in alarm, but in focus. He didn't bark, he didn't growl, he didn't strain against the leash, he just stopped. Jacob took one more step before the tension in the leash registered. His arm reacted before his mind did, giving a short corrective tug, the kind that usually brought immediate compliance. "Heel," he said quietly, his voice low, even, carrying no frustration. Ranger did not move. Jacob frowned, more confused than irritated. Ranger had ignored commands before, rarely, but only when there was immediate danger or a conflicting directive. This was neither. The street was empty, quiet, still. "Ranger," Jacob repeated, firmer now. Nothing. The dog's posture had changed subtly. His weight was forward, chest expanded, tail still but relaxed, his nose angled toward the sidewalk ahead, where a figure sat half-hidden in shadow near a closed bakery. Jacob followed Ranger's line of sight. The girl could not have been more than 19. She sat on the concrete with her knees drawn to her chest, wrapped in an oversized gray coat that swallowed her frame. She was slender, almost fragile-looking, her shoulders narrow, posture defensive rather than weak. Long blonde hair spilled messily from beneath a knit cap, strands escaping to cling to her pale cheeks. Her skin was fair, almost translucent in the cold light, lips dry and cracked. There was a faint mark along her jawline, not a scar exactly, more like the remnant of an old injury that had healed imperfectly. She was holding something close to her chest, a worn backpack, hugged as if it were alive. Jacob looked away immediately. It was automatic, a trained dismissal. He had seen this scene too many times, in too many cities. Homeless youth, runaways, victims of systems too large to care. The file had a place in his mind, neatly labeled, already closed. He had done his share. He had learned that stopping every time only hollowed you out faster. He tugged the leash again, sharper this time. "Come on." Ranger didn't move. Jacob exhaled slowly through his nose, irritation flickering. "Ranger, heel." The dog shifted slightly, but instead of following, he lowered himself to the ground, front legs folding with deliberate control until he lay flat on the cold pavement, head still angled toward the girl. Jacob froze. That behavior, lying down, submissive but attentive, was reserved. Ranger did that only when encountering someone he instinctively identified as non-threatening and significant: children, injured civilians, occasionally individuals tied closely to Jacob himself. This was not trained behavior. This was recognition. Jacob's pulse quickened, a sharp, unwelcome sensation. He shook his head once, as if to dislodge the thought before it could take shape. "No," he muttered under his breath, more to himself than to the dog. He looked at the girl again, forcing himself to be clinical. Observe. Assess. She rocked slightly, a slow, unconscious motion, as if soothing herself. Her lips moved faintly, sound barely audible over the wind. A song. Soft, broken by the cold. "You are my sunshine." The words reached him like a blow to the chest. Jacob's grip on the leash tightened. For a moment, the street disappeared, replaced by memory. Warm interiors, a child's small weight against his chest, a woman's voice humming that same melody in the quiet hours before dawn. He swallowed hard. That was impossible. The file had been closed 12 years ago. Confirmed disappearance, presumed deceased. He had signed the paperwork himself. He had watched the search team stand down. He had buried the version of himself that believed in endings. The girl shifted, her voice fading as she pressed her forehead briefly against the backpack, fingers tightening around the straps. She did not look up. She did not seem aware of them at all. Ranger remained still. Jacob's mind raced, logic clashing violently with instinct. Dogs could detect many things: stress, fear, chemicals, illness. He knew that. He had trained for it. But this was coincidence layered over exhaustion, nothing more. He forced his feet to move, stepping closer despite himself. The crunch of snow made the girl flinch. Her head lifted slightly, eyes flicking toward him, then dropping again just as quickly. Her gaze had been empty, unfocused, like someone looking through fog. Jacob stopped a few feet away. Up close, he could see how young she really was, the hollowness beneath her eyes, the tension in her shoulders. She smelled faintly of cold fabric and old soap. Nothing familiar, nothing definitive. Ranger's nose lifted again, drawing in her scent with intent that made Jacob's chest tighten painfully. The leash trembled in his hand. This was not part of the mission. There was no protocol for this moment, no checklist, no rulebook that explained why his dog refused to move or why his heart felt like it had forgotten how to beat properly. Jacob stood there, suspended between training and something far older, far more dangerous. For the first time in 12 years, the certainty he had built his life upon cracked just enough to let doubt through, and Ranger, unmoving at his side, had already chosen. Jacob did not speak to her right away. Silence, he had learned, revealed more than questions ever could. He loosened his grip on the leash just enough to give Ranger slack without releasing control, his posture angled sideways rather than head-on, a stance he used instinctively when approaching someone fragile or unpredictable. The girl noticed the shift. Her rocking slowed. She glanced at Ranger again, then at Jacob's boots, scuffed and snow-dusted, before lowering her eyes. Up close, she looked even younger than he had first thought, not because of her features, but because of the way she held herself, guarded and folded inward. She was tall for a woman, long-limbed but underweight, her wrists narrow, fingers reddened by the cold. Strands of blonde hair clung to her lips as she breathed, and she brushed them away with a distracted motion that felt practiced, as if she had learned long ago how to keep herself from unraveling in public. Her eyes were a pale gray blue, distant but alert, scanning without truly focusing. There was no visible makeup, no jewelry except the thin bracelet around her left wrist, its once-colored beads dulled and cracked with age. Ranger shifted slightly closer, his body angled protectively but not possessively, his head lowering until it was level with her knee. He didn't touch her. He waited. The girl swallowed. "He's big," she said softly, her voice hoarse from cold and disuse. "But he's not scary." Jacob nodded once. "He won't hurt you." She hesitated, then reached out with 2 fingers, brushing the fur along Ranger's neck. The dog remained still, eyes half-lidded, tail unmoving. Her breath caught at the contact, not in fear but in recognition she could not explain. "What's his name?" she asked. "Ranger." She smiled faintly, a small, uncertain curve of the lips. "That fits." Jacob watched her closely. There were patterns in the way people spoke when they were grounded in reality versus when they drifted. She was here, present, damaged, yes, but not lost in delusion. That mattered. "And yours?" he asked, keeping his tone neutral. She hesitated again, longer this time. Her fingers tightened briefly around the strap of her backpack. "Leah," she said. "That's what people call me." "Is that your name?" She shook her head slowly. "I don't know. It's the one that doesn't hurt." The words landed heavier than she intended. Jacob felt them settle somewhere deep, somewhere he had kept sealed for years. Names carried weight. He understood that too well. The wind picked up, sending a sharp gust down the street. Leah shivered, pulling her coat tighter. Jacob glanced around. There was no reason to stay here longer than necessary, no reason except the one screaming at him to do something. "There's a coffee place 2 blocks down," he said. "It's still open, warm." Her eyes flicked up sharply, suspicion flaring. She drew back slightly, hand instinctively moving to the pocket of her coat. I'm not asking you to go anywhere you don't want to," Jacob said quickly. "Just offering." Ranger lifted his head, glancing at her, then back at Jacob, as if awaiting permission to move. The girl looked between them, uncertainty warring with something else. Exhaustion, maybe. Or hope, which was often more dangerous. "Just coffee?" she asked. "Just coffee." She nodded once. "Okay." They walked slowly, Jacob matching her pace without comment. He noticed the way she flinched at sudden sounds, how her shoulders tensed when a car passed too close. Ranger stayed at her side now rather than Jacob's. Not pulling. Simply present. The leash formed a loose triangle between them, an unspoken agreement. Inside the cafe, warmth wrapped around them immediately. The place was nearly empty, save for a woman behind the counter and an older man hunched over a newspaper in the corner. The woman looked up as they entered. She was in her late 40s, sturdy and broad-shouldered, with dark curly hair pulled into a messy bun and skin weathered by years of steam and late nights. Her name tag read Sarah. She had kind eyes, the kind that noticed everything without making a spectacle of it. "Evening," Sarah said, her gaze flicking briefly to Leah before settling back on Jacob. "Cold one," Jacob nodded. "2 coffees, whatever's hot." Sarah's eyes softened as she turned toward the machine. "On the house," she said quietly, not asking, just deciding. Leah stiffened. It's fine," Sarah cut in gently. "I don't argue with the cold." Jacob guided Leah to a small table near the wall. Ranger lay down beside her chair without prompting, his body pressed lightly against her shin. She didn't pull away. As the coffee arrived, steam curling upward, Leah wrapped her hands around the cup as if afraid it might disappear. She took a careful sip, then another, her shoulders relaxing incrementally with each breath. Jacob watched her over the rim of his own cup. He noted the way her eyes lingered on Ranger, the way her fingers traced the edge of the bracelet absent-mindedly. He didn't ask about it yet. Instead, he asked, "How long have you been on your own?" She shrugged. "A while. I move around. It's easier that way." "Do you remember where you came from?" Her gaze dropped. "Not really. I remember pieces, sounds, cold, someone singing." Jacob's jaw tightened. She glanced up, catching his expression, and frowned. "I'm sorry. Did I say something wrong?" No, he said quickly. You didn't. Silence settled again, heavier now but not hostile. Leah studied him openly for the first time, her eyes tracing the lines of his face, the scar at his brow, the rigid set of his shoulders. You're military, she said. Yes. You don't talk like the cops, she added. You listen more. Jacob gave a small, humorless smile. That came later. Ranger shifted, resting his chin briefly on her foot. Leah inhaled sharply, then laughed under her breath, surprised. He does that, she said. Dogs always do. Do what? Pick me. Jacob's chest tightened painfully. Outside, snow began to fall harder, the streetlights blurring into soft halos. Inside the cafe, time slowed, stretching thin. Jacob knew he was standing at the edge of something irreversible. He didn't know yet whether stepping forward would save either of them or destroy what little balance they had left. Across the table, Leah traced the bracelet again, her thumb catching on one of the cracked beads. I used to have a different name, she said suddenly, without looking up. I think. Jacob held his breath. It was longer, she continued. Softer. But when I try to say it, everything goes dark. Ranger lifted his head. Jacob knew, with a clarity that terrified him, that whatever came next would change the course of all their lives. He did not reach across the table. He did not say the name burning on his tongue, not yet. Jacob drove east before dawn, the highway out of Helena still wrapped in shadow, snow pushed to the shoulders like unfinished thoughts. Spokane waited 3 hours away, a city he had not returned to since the winter. Everything stopped making sense. He left Leah in a warming shelter Sarah had quietly arranged the night before. Temporary, clean, staffed by people who spoke softly and did not crowd. Ranger stayed with Jacob. The dog had settled into the passenger side footwell, head resting against the door, eyes alert but calm, as if he understood this leg of the journey was not about comfort, but confirmation. The county records building in Spokane sat squat and gray, concrete stained by decades of weather, its windows narrow and uninviting. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and disinfectant. Jacob moved through the corridors with the same restrained focus he used on operations. No hesitation, no wasted motion, though his chest felt tight in a way he could not attribute to exertion. He gave his name at the desk, his voice steady, and waited. When he was finally escorted into the records room, Ranger was asked to stay outside. Jacob complied, though the separation scraped at him more than it should have. The archivist assigned to him was a man in his late 50s named Thomas Keene, tall and stooped with a receding hairline and wire-rimmed glasses perched precariously on his nose. Keene had the air of someone who had spent a lifetime among other people's tragedies, courteous, careful, but emotionally armored. He spoke in a measured tone, as if every sentence were a ledger entry. We keep cold cases in the back, he said, unlocking a metal cabinet. Not many people ask for them anymore. Jacob nodded. He had not asked for years either. The file was thinner than he remembered. That struck him first. A man expects weight from grief, expects it to occupy space. This one fit easily into Keene's hands. Photos clipped to the inside cover showed a crushed guardrail along an icy ravine, tire marks vanishing into snow, a child's boot recovered downstream. The report language was precise and restrained, heavy with words like presumed and likely. There was no line that said deceased. There never had been. Jacob's jaw tightened. Why wasn't that ever corrected? He asked quietly. Keene adjusted his glasses. It wasn't incorrect. It was inconclusive. Search was terminated due to conditions. No body recovered. We don't close cases like this, we archive them. Archive. Not close. The difference felt enormous now. Jacob turned the pages slowly. Witness statements, weather reports, a timeline reconstructed from fragments, then an evidence log abbreviated and easy to miss. Item 17, juvenile bracelet, multicolored beads, elastic string, recovered near vehicle interior. Item disposition, not retained, lost during transfer. Jacob closed his eyes. He could see it as clearly as if it were still wrapped around a small wrist. He remembered fastening it himself, clumsy fingers fumbling with the clasp while a 7-year-old laughed and told him he was doing it wrong. He had thought it trivial then. A toy. He understood now how wrong that was. May I copy this? He asked. Keene nodded. You can have the whole file. Outside, the sky had lightened to a pale, uncertain blue. Jacob sat on the steps with the file on his knees and breathed until the shaking in his hands stopped. The truth did not arrive like a revelation. It arrived like a correction, a line redrawn where it should have been all along. The case had never ended. He had ended it himself because continuing had been unbearable. He drove back toward Helena with the sun low and blinding, the file buckled into the passenger seat like a fragile passenger. Ranger lifted his head once, sniffed the air, then settled again. The dog did not need explanation. He seemed to accept that some trails took time. By late afternoon, Jacob was back at the shelter. Leah was sitting near a window, knees tucked beneath her, a paper cup warming her hands. She looked smaller indoors, stripped of the illusion that the street gave her of self-sufficiency. When she saw Jacob, she straightened, uncertainty flickering across her face. Ranger crossed the room first, tail low and steady. Leah's shoulders eased as the dog approached, her hand finding the fur at his neck without conscious thought. She smiled, then caught herself, as if smiling were a risk. Jacob took the chair opposite her, placing the file on the table but not opening it. He didn't want paper to lead. He wanted people. I went to Spokane, he said, to look at records. Her fingers stilled. About me? About a girl, he replied, who disappeared a long time ago. She swallowed. Did you find her? Jacob watched her closely. There were tells in the way memory pressed against trauma, the slight tremor in her jaw, the way her gaze drifted when she approached something painful. He kept his voice low. I found proof that no one ever found her. Leah nodded slowly, as if that made sense. That happens, she said. People get tired. Yes, Jacob agreed. They do. He slid the file a few inches closer, then stopped. May I ask you something? He said. She hesitated, then nodded. Do you remember a river? Her breath caught. She looked away toward the window. Outside, snow had begun to fall again, soft and deliberate. I remember water, she said. Cold, loud. I don't remember falling. I remember holding on to something blue. Jacob's heart hammered. The boot. He did not say it. Do you remember a bracelet? He asked gently. She lifted her wrist without looking down, the motion automatic. The beads were dull now, some cracked, the elastic frayed but intact. I don't know why I keep it, she said. If I take it off, I feel untethered. Jacob reached into the file and withdrew, a photocopy of the evidence log, turning it so she could see the line item without the context that would overwhelm her. He pointed, not touching her. This was recorded the day the girl disappeared, he said. It matches. Leah stared at the page. Her breathing quickened, shallow and uneven. Ranger shifted closer, pressing his shoulder against her leg. She closed her eyes, writing out the surge. When she opened them again, they were wet but focused. I used to have a different name, she said, the words tumbling out now, urgent. It comes to me when I'm half asleep. It feels like warmth and fear at the same time. Jacob did not interrupt. It was Emily, she whispered. I think Emily, but when I say it, my head hurts, like I'm stealing it. The room seemed to tilt. Jacob's throat closed around the name he had carried like a shard for 12 years. He forced himself to breathe. You're not stealing anything, he said. Names don't belong to pain. She looked at him then, really looked, studying the lines at his eyes, the scar at his brow. You know that name, she said. It was not an accusation. It was recognition. I do, Jacob said, and I know where it came from. Silence stretched, fragile and electric. Leah's hands trembled, then steadied as she rested them on Ranger's back. If I am her, she said slowly, why don't I remember you? Jacob felt the question like a physical blow. He did not flinch. Because memory doesn't owe us anything, he said, and because what you survived rewired how your mind protects you. She nodded, absorbing this with a seriousness that belied her years. If I remember, she asked, will it hurt? Yes, Jacob said, and then it will hurt less. She considered him for a long moment. Then she exhaled, a long, shaky breath. "Don't tell me everything," she said. "Not yet." Relief and fear collided inside him. "I won't," he promised. Ranger lifted his head, ears pricked, as if punctuating the moment. Leah reached out and touched Jacob's hand, just briefly, then withdrew. The contact was light, exploratory, but it grounded them both. Outside, the snow thickened, erasing the edges of the world. Inside, Jacob understood with painful clarity that the truth had surfaced, but it had not finished unfolding. The file had never been closed, neither had the story. And now, finally, it was asking to be told the right way. Bozeman, Montana greeted them with a quieter cold, the kind that settled gently instead of biting, the mountains standing like witnesses that had seen grief come and go for centuries. Jacob chose the town deliberately. It was far enough from Helena to break patterns, close enough to medical resources, and calm in a way that did not overwhelm. Leah, Emily, though he still did not say the name aloud unless she did, sat in the back seat during the drive, watching frost trace shapes along the window. She didn't ask where they were going. She rarely asked questions now. She seemed to understand that answers arrived best when they were not chased. The safe house was not a hospital. Jacob had refused that. Instead, it was a converted craftsman-style home on a quiet street near the edge of town, run by a small trauma support program. White siding, low roofline, warm light spilling from the windows even during the day. Inside, the air smelled faintly of cedar and tea. The floors creaked softly underfoot, the kind of sound that reminded people they were not alone. They were greeted by Dr. Mara Ellison, a woman in her early 50s with ash-brown hair cut just below the jaw, streaked naturally with silver she did not try to hide. She was tall and slender, with long fingers and a posture that suggested patience rather than authority. Her skin was olive-toned, her eyes dark and observant, the kind that never rushed to fill silence. Years earlier, she had worked emergency psychiatric response with veterans and disaster survivors. Burnout had taken her out of hospitals and into places like this, where healing could unfold without fluorescent lights and clipped schedules. "Leah," Dr. Ellison said gently, offering her name without extending a hand. "You can call me Mara." Leah nodded once, her shoulders tense but not rigid. Ranger stepped slightly ahead of her, then paused, glancing back as if checking permission. Dr. Ellison noticed immediately. "He can stay," she said, not asking Jacob, just understanding. "Animals like him are part of the nervous system now." Ranger lay down at Leah's feet with a quiet huff, his body pressed close enough that she could feel his warmth through the thin fabric of her jeans. Her breathing slowed. The first few days passed without urgency. That, Jacob learned, was intentional. Meals were simple, schedules flexible. Leah slept long hours, sometimes curled on her side with Ranger's head tucked against her knees. Other times she paced the small backyard, boots crunching on frost, her hands rubbing together as if trying to generate heat from memory alone. Jacob stayed nearby but never hovered. He fixed a loose hinge on the back door. He shoveled the walk before anyone asked. He listened more than he spoke. When Dr. Ellison suggested DNA testing, she did so without ceremony. "Not as proof," she explained, her voice even, "as permission, for your body to believe what your mind isn't ready to yet." Leah considered this for a long time. "Will it tell me who I'm supposed to be?" she asked. "No," Mara replied. "It will tell you who you came from. The rest is yours." Jacob sat very still, his hands folded loosely in front of him. He didn't push. He had learned painfully that pressure destroyed more than it revealed. "I'll do it," Leah said finally. "But I don't want to see the paper." Jacob nodded. "You won't." The sample collection was quick, almost anticlimactic. A swab, a label, a sealed envelope. Ranger watched the entire process with quiet intensity, ears flicking, eyes tracking hands. When it was done, Leah looked relieved, as if something heavy had been set down without explanation. The waiting was worse. Jacob had waited for many things in his life: deployments, casualty lists, confirmation calls. But this was different. This waiting asked him to imagine two futures at once, and to survive both. At night, he lay awake on the narrow bed in the spare room, staring at the ceiling fan as it traced slow circles. He replayed moments he had buried: a child's laughter echoing in a hallway, a small hand slipping from his grip on a snowy afternoon, the sound of rushing water that never left his dreams. He wondered who he had become in the absence of fatherhood and whether there was still space inside him to hold it again. Leah waited differently. She filled the silence with small, grounding rituals. She learned how to make tea the way Mara did, steeping the leaves until the color felt right. She brushed Ranger every morning, careful and methodical, as if grooming him anchored her to the day. Sometimes she sat at the kitchen table, tracing the outline of her bracelet on paper, over and over, like a map she almost recognized. When the call came, it was Mara who answered it. She listened without interruption, nodding once, then twice. She did not smile. She didn't frown. She simply said, "Thank you," and hung up. Jacob stood from the chair before she turned to face him. He knew. He had known since the moment Ranger refused to move on a frozen street in Helena. Mara met his eyes. "It's a match," she said quietly. "Parent and child. No ambiguity." Jacob exhaled, a sound halfway between a breath and a collapse. He pressed his palms together, steadying himself, and nodded. "Thank you." "What would you like to do next?" Mara asked. Jacob swallowed. "I want her to decide." They found Leah in the living room, sitting cross-legged on the rug with Ranger's head in her lap. She looked up as they entered, her expression open, curious, but not afraid. Mara sat first, keeping her voice calm. The results came back. Leah's fingers tightened slightly in Ranger's fur. "Okay. They confirm that Jacob is your biological father." The room went very still. Leah blinked once, then again. Her gaze shifted slowly to Jacob, studying him with new intensity, as if she were seeing him for the first time and the last time all at once. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her chest rose sharply, breath catching, and her hands began to tremble. Jacob didn't move. He wanted to cross the room in 2 strides, to pull her into his arms and anchor her there, but he stayed where he was, every muscle locked. He had learned the hard way that survival instincts did not disappear just because truth arrived. "I'm sorry," Leah whispered suddenly, tears spilling without warning. "I don't remember you. I don't remember being yours." Jacob shook his head once, slow and deliberate. "You don't owe me memory," he said. "You don't owe me anything." Her shoulders shook harder now, the sobs deep and unguarded. She folded forward, pressing her face briefly into Ranger's neck. The dog responded immediately, shifting his weight, nudging her chest gently until she straightened enough to breathe. Then, with impeccable timing that would have been funny if it weren't so devastating, Ranger stood, wedged himself between Leah and Jacob, and sat down squarely, tail sweeping the rug. Leah let out a wet, surprised laugh through her tears. "He's blocking you." Jacob felt something crack inside his chest. A sound escaped him. Not quite a laugh, not quite a sob. "He does that," he said hoarsely. "He likes to manage situations." Leah wiped her face with the sleeve of her sweater, still smiling faintly. "I think he likes me." "He does," Jacob replied. "So do I." The words hung there, fragile but true. They did not embrace. Not yet. Leah reached out instead, her hand hovering uncertainly before resting briefly against Jacob's forearm. The contact was light, exploratory, as if testing the temperature of a future she was not ready to enter fully. Jacob did not move his arm. He let her decide when to pull away. Outside, the light shifted as clouds rolled in over the mountains. Inside, nothing was resolved, and yet everything had changed. The truth had arrived, not with tears that washed pain away, but with a quiet weight that demanded patience. And for the first time in 12 years, Jacob did not run from it. Missoula, Montana arrived quietly, without ceremony, as if it understood that this chapter of their lives did not need spectacle. Spring had begun its slow work there, snow retreating into the mountains, the Clark Fork River swollen with meltwater and moving steadily west, carrying pieces of winter away without looking back. Jacob chose Missoula not because it promised answers, but because it offered space. Wide sidewalks, open skis, and a rhythm that did not rush the wounded. The apartment was modest, second floor, pale walls and wide windows that let morning light spill in without asking permission. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen that smelled faintly of pine cleaner and new beginnings. Emily stood in the doorway the first night, backpack still slung over one shoulder, unsure whether setting it down meant something permanent. Jacob did not tell her to unpack. He had learned that ownership of space came best when it was chosen. Emily's days began slowly. She learned to wake without panic, her body no longer jolting at the sound of a car door or footsteps in the hall. Sleep came in stretches at first, 2 hours, then 4, then a full night that left her disoriented in a new way, blinking at the ceiling as if surprised she was still alive. She practiced saying her name out loud, not every day, not with confidence, but with curiosity. "Emily?" she would murmur in the quiet kitchen, testing the sound like a foreign language she wanted to learn rather than reclaim. Physically, she was gaining weight, color returning gradually to her skin. Her blonde hair, once brittle and uneven, had been trimmed into a simple shoulder-length cut that framed her face and softened the faint scar along her jaw. She was tall, slim, her movements still cautious but no longer apologetic. She had a habit of listening with her whole body, head slightly tilted, eyes alert, as if the world were always one sound away from danger. That vigilance had kept her alive. Now it was learning to rest. Jacob watched these changes without comment. He learned to cook again, not efficiently, not like field rations or single-serving meals eaten standing up, but slowly, imperfectly. Pancakes burned the first time, eggs overcooked the second. Emily laughed once when the smoke alarm went off, a short, startled sound that turned into something warmer when Ranger barked in protest, offended by the noise. Jacob froze at the laughter, heart stuttering, then forced himself to breathe through it. Joy, he was learning, could be just as destabilizing as grief. Ranger adapted fastest. At 5 years old, he was still in his prime, his amber-toned coat gleaming in the morning sun, muscles lean and coiled beneath the fur. He followed Emily everywhere at first, bathroom door, bedroom threshold, kitchen counter, until she finally crouched and pressed her forehead to his, whispering, "I'm okay." After that, he learned new distances, new permissions. He lay at her feet while she read on. The couch. He slept just outside her door instead of inside. He accepted that she was no longer a crisis to be managed, but a person to be trusted. Jacob's learning curve was steeper. He had spent most of his adult life in environments where clarity came from command and control. Fatherhood, he was discovering, required a different kind of discipline. The restraint to not fix, to not instruct, to not ask questions simply because silence made him uncomfortable. When Emily startled at a dropped pan, his instinct was to reach for her shoulder. He stopped himself. When she went quiet during a walk, his instinct was to fill the space. He resisted. He learned to walk beside her without trying to lead. They began seeing Mara once a week in Missoula, sessions held in a sunlit office that smelled of books and mint tea. Emily spoke more there, words emerging cautiously, not as confessions but as observations. She talked about the years between, not in linear narratives, but in sensations, cold fingers, loud nights, kindness from strangers that felt temporary. She spoke about identity as something fluid, something that could be lost and rebuilt without betrayal. Jacob listened from the chair across the room, hands folded, eyes fixed on a knot in the wood floor, absorbing truths he could not change but could finally witness. Outside therapy, life continued in small ways. Emily learned how to grocery shop without flinching at crowds. She learned that she preferred her coffee light and sweet, that she hated the sound of styrofoam, that she liked mornings best because they felt honest. Jacob learned that his daughter did not like to be surprised, that she needed warning before plans changed, that humor worked best when it was self-directed. He learned that she was observant, quietly sharp, and deeply kind in ways that did not demand recognition. One afternoon, Jacob brought home a used bicycle he had found at a local shop, red paint chipped, tires newly replaced. He left it leaning against the wall without comment. Emily stared at it for a long time, then ran her fingers along the handlebars. "I don't remember learning," she said softly. "You don't have to," Jacob replied. "You can just ride." She did. Poorly at first, then better. Ranger trotted alongside her, ears flapping, convinced this was his idea. When she finally circled back, breathless and smiling, Jacob felt something inside him settle into place. Not healed, not fixed, but aligned. Spring deepened. The river ran high, brown, and fast, carrying branches and winter debris downstream. One morning, without planning it, they walked along the Clark Fork together. Emily held Ranger's leash loosely, confident now, her stride longer, less guarded. Jacob walked beside her, hands in his pockets, shoulders relaxed in a way he had not known they could be. They didn't talk much. They did not need to. At one point, Emily stopped and watched the water for a long moment. "It keeps going," she said. "Even when it hits rocks." Jacob nodded. "Especially then." She glanced at him, something thoughtful in her expression. "I don't feel like I came back," she said. "I feel like I'm still going." Jacob swallowed, emotion pressing hard against his ribs. "That's exactly right," he said. Ranger sat between them, tail thumping once against the dirt, satisfied with this assessment. They stood there longer than necessary, letting the sun warm their faces, letting the river speak for them. There were still appointments ahead, still paperwork, still memories that would surface at inconvenient times. None of that disappeared because a test confirmed biology or because a home existed now, but they were no longer walking alone. As they turned back toward the path, Emily reached out without looking and slipped her hand into Jacob's. He stiffened for half a second, then relaxed, fingers closing gently around hers. The contact was simple, unceremonious, and profoundly real. Behind them, the river carried winter away. Ahead of them, the path curved out of sight, and for the first time, Jacob understood that family was not the absence of loss, but the refusal to abandon one another again. Sometimes miracles don't arrive as thunder or light from the sky. Sometimes they come as a pause you didn't expect, a path you almost walked past, or a heart that refuses to move forward without looking back. If you believe in God, you may see this story as a reminder that He works quietly, patiently, and often through the smallest signs, through instinct, timing, and love that never truly disappears. What was lost was never forgotten. What was broken was never beyond His reach. In our daily lives, we rush, we follow routines, we learn how to survive by not stopping. But maybe the miracle you're waiting for is already there, asking you to slow down, to listen, to stay just a little longer. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment and tell us where you're watching from or what moment stayed with you the most. And if you believe in stories of healing, second chances, and quiet faith, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so we can continue walking these journeys together. May God bless you, protect you, and guide your steps. And may you never walk past the miracle meant for you.